All right. First, welcome to my webinar. This webinar is courtesy of the National Indian Justice Center. My name is Carrie Brown, and today we're going to discuss how to conduct a car seat checkpoint. If you have any questions or need help with resources, my contact information will be made available at the end of this PowerPoint. Please do not hesitate to call or email me with any questions or needs that you may have. All right. So these are the learning objectives I hope we will accomplish by the end of this module. While these learning objectives are short and simple, we have a lot of information to cover. So I hope to be done somewhere in between 30 to 60 minutes, so bear with me, folks. Please note that this module is a guideline. You will find that some of the things we discussed today may or may not fit your community, and that's okay. This is merely just to give you a jumping off point for when you're planning your first CPS checkup event. Please note that checkup event and checkpoint are two terms that I'll use interchangeably, so they will mean the same thing. So first, let's briefly touch base on the primary role and goal of CPS technicians and CPS checkpoints or checkup events. The primary role of a child passenger safety technician is to educate caregivers. With that being said, the primary role of a car seat checkpoint is to provide education to the community through an event. The knowledge technicians provide is meant to empower caregivers to properly install and advocate for the use of appropriate car seats for their child. The purpose of the checkup event is to provide an education service, not an installation service. So that is one of the primary concepts that you learn in CPS technician course to become a certified technician, is that you are an educator, not an installer. Ultimately, though, your main goal is to make sure that everybody leaves your checkpoint safer than when they arrived. So let's jump into planning. There are some things to note about planning. If you have grants for CPS activities, you will want to start planning your year as soon as possible. This will include any CPS checkpoints and checkup events. For example, if your tribe receives funding from BIA via the Highway Safety Grant specific to child passenger safety, one of your objective activities may include conducting a car seat checkpoint event. If this is the case, you're going to want to begin your planning as soon as possible. Don't wait until a few weeks before your grant is up and try to squeeze in these types of event activities. Furthermore, also do not try to schedule or plan a car seat checkpoint or any community event in a couple of weeks. For a car seat checkpoint to be as successful as possible, you really want to start planning about 2 months in advance. So the main areas of planning that you will really want to focus on is site selection, staffing, checkup setup, operations, liability, promotion, and follow-up. So again, planning is not optional. You don't just decide one day that you want to throw together a car seat checkpoint, because if you are hasty with your planning, your event is not going to be as successful as it could be. So now we're going to move on to site selection. Now, there are basically two different types of site selection. You can have an outdoor or an indoor setting. Both of them have pros and cons associated with each. So with outdoor settings, one of the pros with that is that it provides the advantage of space and ample parking, which is going to be very, very important when you're conducting a car seat checkpoint. You want as much space as possible, and you want as much open space as possible. However, outdoor settings do leave you, your volunteers, and your clients exposed to the elements. So if you're going to be outdoors, you should plan to have a pop-up canopy, provide sunscreen, blankets, perhaps heaters, or anything that's going to help ease potentially harsh weather that you can encounter, whether that be hot or cold. The second is indoor locations. So these may include a fire department or vehicle service garage with drive-through bays. An indoor location provides many benefits, especially if you're living in a state that experiences extreme highs and lows, like I'm from Nevada, so we can experience rain, snow, wind, sun, extreme hot or cold all within one day at sometimes. So you want to make sure that you're prepared for that. However, some things to note about indoor locations is that they are often cramped and they can be crowded, and a lot of times the acoustics are poor. However, do a site visit. This is super important. If you already have a place in mind, it really helps you to do a logistics check and visit this venue before you commit to it. This will give you greater insight on how you're going to be able to set up, how you want your traffic to flow, where volunteers can park, and where you want your cars to line up in queue. So here are some things you will want to consider when selecting your venue. So entry and exit. Ideally, you're going to have one of each. You're going to have one entry area where cars pull into so that they can wait in queue, and one exit somewhere else that's not the same as the entry exit. You want a place that's going to be easy to find. You don't want to select a venue that is far off the beaten path or that is complicated to get to. Also, you're going to want to select a place where the possibility of one-way traffic is good. And we'll discuss a little bit more about one-way traffic in a further slide. Also, you're going to want to consider the waiting area, so where your cars are going to line up at and wait in queue. Another thing to think about when you're selecting a site visit is, are there accessible restrooms? And you also want to consider, are these restrooms going to be available for volunteers only, or will they be available to the public? Also, you want to look at where you're going to be able to put supply stations or supply tables. So ideally, you would have at least 2 different areas where you're going to have tables. You're going to have a table at the very front of where cars are waiting in queue for your greeter to utilize, and then you may also want to have a second table where you have installation supplies and other types of educational materials for parents to pick up. Another thing to consider is inspection stations. So you're going to want to look at your parking lot and be able to locate where you're going to be able to set up your individual inspection stations. Also, another thing to consider is safety. We will talk more in depth about safety, but just as a rule of thumb, when you're considering a site or considering a venue to do a CPS checkup event, safety is going to be a big issue. So is the area that you're utilizing open? Does it allow for good visibility? Also, is it in a decent neighborhood? I have heard horror stories about people getting shot during these events. So please make a note of where your venue is at and if it's a safe area for families to visit. Another thing is that is very, 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 very important is date and time. You want to make sure to pick a date and time that is available at the preferred venue, but you also want a date that is going to be the most convenient for the population that you are trying to serve. So if you are trying to serve just, regular working moms and dads, having it on a Saturday morning is probably going to work out better for you than trying to conduct a checkpoint during a school or work day in the afternoon. So in reference to the slide, the photo on the slide is from the Texas Department of State Health Services. I personally would not recommend this particular setup because the cars are parked in a way that requires them to back up when they're ready to leave, which is something you want to avoid as much as possible during this type of event where children are going to be potentially running around, people are going to be walking back and forth, and visibility may be slightly limited. Ideally, all the traffic should only move forward and only in one way. So staffing, volunteers and staff are the most important resource in any event planning, whether that be a CPS checkpoint or a health fair or a DUI checkpoint, any type of community event, staffing is going to be a pivotal cornerstone of the success of your event. So having enough people to work your checkpoint can make or break your event. The event coordinator is basically going to be your ringleader. So this person will most likely be you. If you are viewing this webinar as an injury prevention coordinator, as a traffic safety specialist, or just anybody who is spearheading child passenger safety activities, you will most likely be the event coordinator for any CPS checkpoint activities. So there are a few things that the event coordinator must do before, during, and after the event. So before the event coordinator is responsible for securing the location, date, time, conduct a location site visit, also recruit staff, order supplies and educational materials, get all of the materials that you're going to need for distribution, and this includes car seats if you will be distributing car seats at your checkpoint, promote the event, and provide a briefing to your staff. Now with the briefing to your staff, you want to have 2 at least. The first one should be a week prior to the event just to confirm that they will be there and where it's going to be, where they should park, and if there are any t-shirts that you would like them to wear or anything of that nature. You can see in this photo right here that all of the volunteers are all wearing yellow shirts. This particular setup works very well, especially if your checkpoint is busy, because it is very easy to see who is a volunteer and who you can ask questions from. So wearing the shirts is very helpful. However, it's not required. So, but those are some topics that you would discuss during your initial meeting. However, if all your volunteers are not available to come to a meeting, and the meeting doesn't need to be in person either, the initial meeting a week prior to your event, you can do it via conference call. You can even send out a simple email saying, hey, this is where we're going to be at. Please park in the south parking lot, and please make sure to wear your yellow t-shirt, and or a yellow t-shirt will be made available to you when you get to the checkpoint. Also, the event coordinator during the event is going to be responsible to make sure the event runs smoothly, troubleshoot any issues that may arise, and ensure that the event is set up correctly. After the event, they are going to be responsible to make sure all materials are packed up and returned to where they belong. So if you borrowed pop-up tents from another department like the police department or your diabetes department, it is going to be the event coordinator's responsibility to ensure that all of those borrowed materials get back to their owners. If you don't, it just really creates friction and poor relations with some of your partners. And anybody who is doing this type of work understands that partnerships are crucial to your program success. Also, after the event has wrapped up, the event coordinator will be responsible to oversee any disposal of old car seats that you may have collected during the event. Also ensures that all paperwork is completed and that evaluations are collected. So completed paperwork is different from evaluation. The 2 main pieces of paperwork that you will have during a car seat checkpoint are going to be your waiver and your inspection checklist. Those are going to be different types of forms. So the waiver we will talk more about in the liability section. And as for the inspection checklist will include items such as how did the car seat arrive? Was it loose? Was the harness being used correctly? How did the car seat leave? Which seating location is it? Did you put the car seat in? And did mom or dad help you with the installation? Those types of questions. Any type of forms or resources that I mentioned in this module, if you need templates or examples of those types of forms, please email me and I can send you something of that nature. I do have templates for waivers, and then I also have templates for car seat inspection checklists and the like. So anyway, moving on, and then also evaluations. So evaluations are going to be different from those 2 previously mentioned forms. Evaluation, there are two different kinds of evaluations. So you can have an evaluation that you hand out to participants at your event, stating what they liked about the event, what did they learn, how long did they have to wait in queue, and how can it be made better. And then there's going to be a separate evaluation that you distribute to your volunteers. And then the volunteers, I always tell my volunteers to be brutally honest, like what could be improved, what worked out well, and what might be some things to make this more comfortable, or what have you. So next, we're going to move on to CPS Technicians. These are your folks doing the installations and providing the education. To be a CPS Technician, you must be certified through Safe Kids Worldwide in order to be a technician. If you plan on serving a mixed demographic, maybe you're in an area where you have a lot of Hispanic families. I once worked with a tribe that was very close to the border, and so a lot of their tribal members were married to Hispanic men and women who did not speak a lot of English. So it worked out well because there were a few technicians in their community who were bilingual. So if you are planning on serving a mixed demographic, it's going to be to your greatest advantage if you can locate a bilingual technician. If you plan, I got distracted here. So also you want to try to get as many technicians as you possibly can. It's better to have too many technicians than too little. And if possible, try to have an instructor or a technician proxy available to do seat sign-off at your event. This will ensure a greater level of safety for all people leaving the checkpoint, and it may provide incentive for technicians to volunteer if they're in need of seat sign-off for their recertification. Proxies and instructors are also a great resource to have at a checkpoint if you have some inexperienced technicians, because they're going to provide those inexperienced technicians with guidance, advice, and it's going to help those inexperienced technicians gain more experience and be more confident in their skill set. The next is greeters and scribes. So you may have people who really want to help and they really want to volunteer, but they're not technicians. But this is great. Volunteers that are not technicians can do several things at a checkpoint. They can greet clients in the cars as they pull up. They can provide parents with the necessary paperwork, and we'll talk more about that in a bit. They can help keep the areas that you're working in clean and safe. They can refurbish used materials. They can direct traffic, and they can even work as scribes for CPS technicians if there aren't enough technicians available to put 2 per inspection station. Also, if you have college interns or community members that may be needing community service, this event is a great opportunity for them to gain some of those hours and then also for you to get free labor. I also like to say scribes are optional. I would personally only use a scribe if you were bare bones, super short on technicians. If this is the case, I would pair a scribe up with a technician to run an individual inspection station. A scribe would go through the CPS checklist and assist the technician. However, the technician would take on the primary role of communicating and educating that family. So basically, the scribe just supports the technician in their activities. This is so, so, so important. If you don't remember anything about your staffing, remember this. Overall, you want to be respectful to your volunteers. Stay on schedule and keep their needs in mind. Provide breaks and lots of fluids, especially if you are working in a very hot climate in the sun. Things that you're going to want to provide for your volunteers are going to be things like if you have sunscreen available, water. Water is a must. Do not ever plan to have a checkpoint if you do not have water available for your people. So next we have event setup. So the setup for your event is going to take in between 60 to 90 minutes on average. It can take a little shorter, it can take a little longer. And it's also important to note that the more events that you conduct, the easier that it's going to be each time. So first, show up early. If your event is scheduled to begin at 10 a.m., you and your volunteers should plan to be there no later than 9. even if you have a very clear vision of how you want your event set up, it will still take a lot of time to get those materials all in place, especially if a lot of your volunteers show up late. Things that you're going to be doing is setting up tables, setting up pop-up tents, placing caution tape and cones. So really important that you get there no later than an hour prior to your scheduled event. Note the diagram here on the slide. This is a very, very simple layout of what a car seat checkpoint could potentially look like. So the blue boxes are vehicles, the red boxes are materials tables, and the black boxes are individual inspection stations, and the arrows denote the flow of traffic. So when you're setting up your event, actually not even then, when you initially did your logistics check, but now you're doing the event setup, you want to identify where you want your cars to line up. This is going to help you serve cars as they arrive. So they're going to be served first come, first serve. Your greeter table should be near the beginning of the line, and the greeter table should have all the necessary materials that a greeter needs to do their job. So like pens, paperwork, clipboards, any education materials or evaluations that you want your participants or your clients to fill out. Before the event begins, you need to take a little bit of time and chat with your greeter, especially if this is kind of like their first go at working a community event. Go over with them the paperwork so that they can answer any questions from clients as they come up, and they will come up. You may wish to do a role play with your greeter as well if this is their first time working a community event. So just your greeter will be the greeter and you will pose as a client. Also, the individual inspection stations, the black boxes, so this is where the magic happens. This is where your technicians are really going to do their thing and shine. So these should be manned by at least 2 technicians or at the very least 1 technician and a scribe. It works best if each station has a tote box with the necessary materials to complete the inspection. However, sometimes there are funding constraints that prevent this from occurring. So if that is the case, the materials can be kept in one central location that are available to all the staff. And so on this particular slide, you'll see that red box at the very top. That is where that is where all the materials will be kept. So materials are going to be like pool noodles, scissors, there could be a scale there. You may have car seats lined up or slid underneath the table that you're going to distribute. So everything that a technician needs to complete an inspection from start to finish is going to be located there. The supply table should be stocked with all the necessary materials to complete an inspection. Another thing you need to have there is additional copies of paperwork. This materials table can also double as a break area for your volunteers. So you may need to set up the table with chairs and a pop-up or some type of mechanism for shade. Also, during your event setup, you want to conduct an orientation. Now, your orientation is going to be very brief, probably 5 to 10 minutes or even less. And you want to have your orientation directly before you begin your checkpoint. And this orientation will be conducted by the coordinator. So this meeting will inform volunteers of basic housekeeping, like where the restrooms are, where they can take a smoke break if necessary. You're going to describe the flow of traffic. So you basically just say, hey, the cars are going to be lining up through that corridor right there. And then they will come here, loop around this way, and pull into the inspection stations. And then they're going to pull forward and leave through the exit on the right. It's also going to describe and verify that everybody knows their role at the checkpoint and who they can contact for help. So this is also time when you want to go over briefly the CPS checklist that you're going to be using and how to fill it out. This is super important because this checkpoint is going to be a prime opportunity for your program to gather vital data on CPS use and misuse in your community. So it's super important that you tell your people how to fill out these checklists and and really reinforce how important it is, because these data sheets can play a huge role in further funding down the line. You may also want to determine a location for placing used seats that have been replaced at the event and how to recycle or destroy them. So if you look at the diagram above, it does not include an area like this. However, you can notice that there is also that bottom left quadrant is completely open. So you might designate some space in that area to place those used seats. You may also opt to give parents information on where they can recycle their used seats and or how to properly dispose of them, because depending on your program, taking used seats may or may not be practical. So now we'll move on to event operations. So first of all, your events need to be open to the public for the publicized time. If your event, on your event flyer, you say you're open until 2, you need to remain open until 2. There's going to be times during your event that traffic is very slow. You may have 1 or 2 cars pulling in. You might have 20 minutes when no cars pull in. However, it's super important that you make sure you remain open until the end of your publicized time. Because should a family show up at 1:30 and you have already packed it in and moved on, that's going to reflect poorly on your program and the fidelity of your program. Also, you want your greeters to welcome families and share information about what to expect during their car seat inspection. Also, instruct the drivers to turn their engines off while they're waiting and during their inspection. This is to prevent any accidental acceleration, any excessive exposure to fumes, and the like. Also, do not allow children to ride unrestrained in a vehicle when moving into the checkup area. Just about anything can happen when you have moving vehicles and children in the same vicinity. So always make sure that even if they've been waiting, they're going to have their children in their vehicle as they move into their inspection area, that their children are still restrained in their car seats. Make certain that the location is safe for families. So what I mean when I say this is, one, space can, you can include a safe space, and this safe space can include an indoor or outdoor waiting area that is clearly defined as a safe area and denoted with rope, tape, and traffic codes. A designated waiting area can be made available for other family members, such as aunts, uncles, or any elders that come, and it's maybe their car is waiting in queue and they don't want to sit in the car for 20 minutes. This is going to be a great place for them to just kind of hang out and chill. It's another great place for young children to hang out as well while the inspection is taking place. Designate a staff or another responsible volunteer to be assigned to the waiting area to ensure that no child is lost or injured. And then also, if possible, provide clean and age-appropriate toys in good condition that can be made available to entertain young children who are hanging out in the safe place. Another thing to say about operations, this is where your event coordinator skills will really be tested. However, if your event coordinator has strong leadership skills, the event can run smoothly and will be over before you know it. So liability. Liability is never a fun topic to bring up, but it's absolutely necessary. So first, when conducting any event, you want to consult with your host to determine how liability protection will be addressed. The activities in a CPS inspection station may be covered under the general insurance policy or through an additional rider of the supporting organization. Consult with the sponsoring organization about specific terms and conditions. So for an example, I had a particular tribe that would increase their insurance policy specifically for events that were held at the health center. I'm not exactly sure why, but anytime that they had events at their health center, their insurance would go from $1 million to $3 million, and that was just their policy, and that's the way that it was. Another thing that you'll want to consider is having a waiver for caregivers to sign before any of your volunteers get into their cars. This is an important part and will be part of the paperwork that caregivers will receive when they pull into queue and are greeted by a volunteer. A well-written waiver will not only protect you and your agency, but it will also protect the clients as well. And it's going to be up to you how stringent you want to be with your waiver. However, in my experience, if someone refused to sign my waiver, then they are refusing service from me. However, in this case, when I had this happen, I would inform the caregiver that due to the policy that we have in place at our agency, that we would not perform the service without a signed waiver, and if they continue to refuse, I would also provide them with a list of resources where they can go to receive a similar service that they may be more comfortable with or may suit their needs better. An example of times that the waiver comes into play, so about 10 years ago when I was doing a car seat checkpoint, I was climbing around in a back seat trying to get a car seat tight, and I accidentally hit a interior light with my shoulder, and I broke the dome of that light. And so our liability waiver protected me from having to pay for that light. Now, yes, the family or the father of that family was not particularly pleased, but he did sign the waiver, so that was the end of that. Next, we'll move on to promotion. Oh, one more thing, and I forgot to mention about liability, is another thing to consider is your state's Good Samaritan laws. So, for example, in the state of Nevada where I reside, the Good Samaritan laws only cover emergency medical care in a public setting. However, in other states, like Wisconsin, for example, they have a clause in their law that directly relates to CPS activities. So that particular law states immunity from civil liability for providing safety services related to the inspection and installation of child safety restraint systems in motor vehicles. It would be a good idea for you to research the law in your state prior to your event. Or if you're having your event on tribal land, check to see if your tribe has any Good Samaritan laws and what they read. If there's a Good Samaritan law in effect that helps protect you, you may want to include that on your waiver. Okay, now we'll move on to promotion. So many families will attend the event just because they happen to drive by and see signs or see something going on. However, advance notification is highly encouraged to ensure that the community knows that this service will be available. Promotion of the date, time, and location is of utmost importance. I mean, I can probably have an endless list of how many times I had heard that my tribe was having some type of event, but I had no idea when and where it was. So here are some tips in helping to mitigate that. So post event information on the tribal agency website, or if your community and/or communities have fitting station or event or an event calendar, that would be a great place to put information about your event. Also, create a community flyer and distribute at local preschools, child care centers, churches, and businesses, and any other local resources. Also, posting a banner at the checkup event location a week prior to the event if your host will allow you to do so. Submit notification to local media resources. So you may opt to pay for advertising in a newspaper or on the radio if you have that available in your budget. Some tribes have their own radio station, and if your tribe does have its own radio station, they may post or do a little snippet for you free of charge as a PSA. Also, another resource for radio is occasionally nearby colleges will have their own radio stations and are always looking for somebody to put something in their ad space. Another thing to utilize would be social media to promote your events. This is great, especially if you know exactly which type of demographic you are trying to reach. If you're trying to reach an older demographic, you may want to use Facebook. If you're trying to reach younger demographic, perhaps you would want to use Snapchat or Twitter. But the great thing about these particular avenues for promotion is that they're free. Another way to promote your event is to piggyback off other events. So if your tribe or community is having event prior to your car seat checkpoint, that would be a great opportunity for you to promote your checkpoint. So give a brief presentation at health fairs or any other kinds of events, or just attend the event and hand out flyers and information about your checkpoint can really go a long way. The last one, incentives. I'm not too keen on incentives, mostly because they can be problematic if you're utilizing grant funds, but some tribes have had success using incentives. So if this is the case, or if you want to try and use incentives, provide incentives for attendance other than car seats. So these incentives can be raffle tickets for a large prize by coming through and getting their car seat checked, maybe 1 ticket per seat, or hand out program promotional items at your checkpoint. So this may also be an opportunity to not just distribute incentives to gain more participation at your checkpoint, but it may also be a time for you to promote your program overall. So maybe you get a swag bag with your program's logo and you fill that bag with water bottles and pens and t-shirts or whatever. So next we got follow-up. So this is, again, where your coordinators are going to do the most work. So once you have cleaned up and your event is over, there's still work to be done. First, you want to review all your checklist forms and make sure that they have been filled out correctly. This is super important for data collection. On each CPS inspection checklist, there will be a little space somewhere on there for the CPS technician that completed that inspection to put their name. So if their paperwork is filled out incorrectly, the coordinator, if they want to, if they wish, can contact that technician and be like, hey, you know, you're missing X, Y, and Z on your checklist. What's going on? Do you remember this vehicle? Can you give me a little bit more information? Second is you want to complete evaluation or activity reports. So if you're required to do reporting to a specific grant, this is the time that you would do that. And also compile the information that you got during your evaluations. You also want to send out thank you letters or notes to the host agency and your volunteers. You'd be very surprised at how far just showing somebody that you appreciate their hard work will go. And also, perhaps provide the host with checkup results to illustrate the benefit of the program. If you can really show that the program has value, the host may opt to, or it may encourage them to want to participate again. So here are some additional tips. So again, here are some additional tips for your first go-around with a car seat checkpoint. So first, policies. You may want to put some policies in place beforehand, specifically addressing the eligibility process for seat distribution at your event, if you will be distributing car seats at your event. So will these car seats only be provided for families on a sliding scale? How will that scale be determined? Or are they only going to go to enrolled tribal members or clinic patients? So you'll need to figure out how you want to govern the distribution of your seats. Another important policy to have is how to handle difficult or abusive clients that may come through your car seat checkpoint. These are generally rare at events of this type because you're offering them a beneficial service for free. However, they do happen. So you'll want a process in place on how to effectively address those types of situations. Excuse me. And you may also want to include a policy that will outline for your clients how they can file a complaint or a grievance. Materials list. So get a materials checklist going. If you don't have any idea what kinds of materials you're going to need, please shoot me an email. Or you can even go online and Google a CPS materials checklist and do a little bit of research on your own. However, if you want to bypass and save some time, just send me an email. I can provide you a list that I have compiled with help from the Indian Health Service, Safe Kids Worldwide, CRIB, and other agencies. So also, you're going to need extra copies of all your forms. You're going to have vehicles arrive with several children in them, and you need to be prepared and anticipate that. Have extra inspection checklists on hand to accommodate those vehicles and in a place that's easily accessible to your technicians. So you want those forms to be sitting on your general supply table, and you would also want those forms at the greeters table, because you're going to occasionally get a car that comes through that has 3 or 4 car seats, but it's the same car, the same parent. So to save a tree and minimize your paperwork, you will have one waiver signed for that one vehicle, and then you'll have 3 different car seat CPS checklists to go with all of those car seats. And also anticipate time. It takes at least 30 to 60 minutes to complete each inspection. Do not rush your technicians. This is so important. I have trained many technicians at this point, and I do see a common theme sometimes where new technicians will want to go, and rush. And that is completely and totally unnecessary. So in this event, it's about quality, not quantity. But do realize that you will have a cut time. So if it reaches the end of your publicized allotted time, do not accept any more vehicles. So if your cutoff time is at 2 and you have cars pulling in at 2:05, you need to be strong and tell them and be firm, I'm sorry, but we are no longer accepting any more vehicles. Our event is now closed. We are just wrapping up the cars that we took prior to 2 o'clock. The big reason for this is I'm a huge proponent and supporter of volunteers, because at one point in my career, I was a volunteer, and I respected and valued my leadership so much more when I felt like I was valued and respected. So respect your volunteers' time and only go for the specified allotted time. Also, when possible, incorporate your culture. Incorporate your tribal culture. I'm a huge cheerleader for making programming more culturally relevant and competent, and this event is no different. Incorporate your tribal culture and customs into your CPS planning and programming as appropriate. For example, I had a tribe that, for whatever reason, their community was reluctant to accept car seats from their injury prevention program. However, during the planning process for doing a car seat checkpoint, we were kind of like, well, what if you asked a respected elder to open and begin the car seat checkpoint with an opening prayer and bless all the seats? And so we did that, and it was a really simple but very powerful and beautiful way to start that CPS checkpoint. And their checkpoints from then on out were much more successful. Above all, be flexible. There's going to be things that happen during your event that you do not plan for. Just roll with those punches and make a note of it as a learning experience for next time. With that being said, anything that I have mentioned in reference to forms or checklists, I have available. If you need a template or a resource, please do not hesitate to contact me. So here is my contact information. Thank you for watching this webinar. If there are any topics that you would like to see in future webinars surrounding child passenger safety or occupant safety, any injury prevention type of work, and or ways to make your program more culturally relevant, please do not hesitate to contact me and let me know what you would like to see in a webinar. So thanks again, and have fun conducting your first CPS event.